What's up? I am David Long. I'm here today to share with you a clip from my recent video about soul, self, awakening, ghosts, afterlife, and reincarnation. I'll have links for you at the end for the full length, and you can also check for links down below.
Alright, last but not least, reincarnation.
What in tarnation? What in train station? What in carnation? What in castration? What in graduation? What in inflation? What in starvation? What in legalization? Decriminalize.
What kind of nation?
No, reincarnation. Okay, so what's the deal with reincarnation? Generally, reincarnation is a Hindu idea. That's the origin. But, other Buddhist sects, Tibetan Buddhists and stuff also believe in reincarnation. The Dalai Lama himself is supposed to be an incarnation. The Dalai Lama doesn't actually remember any of his past lives. Dalai Lama is team science. I've heard him say that if science and his tradition contradict each other, that he's going with science. He seems like a pretty honest dude. Honestly, I think the only reason that he even goes along with the whole thing is because he appreciates the importance of his role within his tradition. And I don't think he wants to dishonor that or undo that. I think he wants to try to use his position skillfully to help people. He's the Dalai Lama. But I definitely think it's interesting how all of these white people appropriate Indian culture without having any idea at all about the historical context. Dalai Lama can't remember his past lives, but these white New Age ladies remember being Cleopatra or whatever. It's never anybody lame either. No one's remembering being an earthworm or a loser. You don't see people coming back with like PTSD or something from past lives. And if they are Cleopatra and you are you, in what sense are you the same? What's the same? What reincarnates? It's not really anything about the content of the person that really reincarnates. Even within the tradition, it's said that your virtue and your goodness reincarnate, but that's not really anything about you necessarily. None of your personal qualities. And don't even get me started on how this idea fits with other ideas about free will and determinism. I think a lot of that psychologically just has to do with people want to have fun, people want to make their story interesting. Maybe their life is mundane and kind of boring, and if they can add some of these kinds of aspects to their own personal story, it makes them seem more interesting. But I do think those people should maybe take a little bit harder look at the tradition. These ideas are not just fun. They are actually really harmful and offensive. So I think as a Westerner, it's really easy for us to see the problems in our own local traditions. It's easy to see the problems in Judaism and Christianity, for example. It's easy to see the harmful, ugly bits of our own traditions. And also it's easy to ignore the beautiful bits of our own traditions. Sometimes it can be really hard to see past the way that these traditions have hurt us to the actual positive, good, and beautiful aspects of them. And I think the reverse thing happens with something like Buddhism or Hinduism. We tend to only see them as beautiful and cool and interesting, and we don't see the ways in which they used to be horrible and used to manipulate people and hurt people, the ways these things are ugly and harmful. And I really do think it is important to be able to weigh pros and cons. I don't think we should say, oh, it's all good or it's all bad. Nothing is all good or all bad. Let's have a little bit of nuance, and let's try to understand these ideas in context and really see them for what they are, both good and bad. I definitely have been very interested in Buddhism and Hinduism over the years, and I appreciate a lot of their culture. Definitely my favorite food. I am no way am trying to diss their culture. I'm just trying to put these ideas in perspective. So a very, very long time ago, the Aryans, I believe, came in and conquered India. This was before India was really even India as we know it. That's much later. But these Aryans came in and they conquered the local people and they imposed upon them their religion. And along with this religion, they created a caste system. And basically the idea is there are these different castes of society, and the Aryan caste is on the top aspects of the hierarchy of the society, and then the native people are on the lower caste. So you have the priestly and warrior castes at the top, and then your more like merchant classes and untouchables at the lowest ends. And this racism in Indian culture is actually still happening today. It might not be as big of an influence as it was back in the day, but it's definitely still a thing. There's still all these ideas about shame and marrying within your class, and I think in general, Americans have a very hard time grasping a lot of the ideas of Hindu culture because their culture is so opposite from ours. roles. For example, in Hindu culture, you don't see actual individuals represented anywhere. What you see are types, a merchant type, a priestly type. The idea is your job in society is to fulfill your dharma, or your social duty. And basically, every Hindu mythology there is all about reinforcing this idea of you do your social duty. So like, for example, the Bhagavad Gita has a lot to do with getting this guy Arjuna to be okay with killing people who are basically his cousins and stuff like that as a warrior, because through doing his role, he holds up the structure of the society and maintains the society. Another Hindu myth jumps to mind of this prostitute called Banumbate. Within the Hindu culture, there's this idea of an act of truth. And the idea is that if you have performed your social duties perfectly, that you will have this magical power of the ability to do an act of truth. So what's happening in the story is that the rivers of the Ganges are coming up and they are threatening to flood the city. And the people come rushing to the king and he says, an act of truth. We need to find somebody who's got an act of truth. And so they start at the highest levels of the society and they work their way down, and nobody has an act of truth. Nobody has been truly fulfilling their dharma in this kind of way, until finally they reach a lowly prostitute, and the king tells her what's going on and asks her to do her act of truth, and she says something like, I have an act of truth that would turn the world of the gods on its head. You know, she goes up to the river and she says, if I have been fair in my service to all people and blah blah blah, if I'm a good prostitute, let the rivers go back. And they do. And in most Western stories, it's like, oh yay, Banumbate, you're like the new queen or whatever. Not in this story. She's still a prostitute. Maybe in her next life, Queen of Benares, but not in this life. So going back to this idea of there being no individual, what these mythologies are trying to do to people is to make them transparent. The goal is to maintain the tradition exactly without ever changing or adding anything to it. Think about the pleasure that we as Americans bring through expressing our unique individuality and being able to make progress by contributing something to whatever it is that we're doing. That's not going to happen in this culture. Now, how does this relate back to reincarnation? Like I was saying, it's a manipulation to reinforce this caste system. The idea is, be good, do what you're supposed to do what you're told, and maybe in the next life, maybe then you'll be born good like me, with nice white skin like mine, and you won't be like inherently a slave. This is offensive, horrible ideas. And I think when most people talk about reincarnation, they have no idea about the cultural context in which these ideas arise and how they've been used to reinforce racism through time. So this word karma, it means action. And the idea is good actions result in good outcomes and bad actions result in bad outcomes. You don't have to believe in anything superstitious to grasp this concept. This is just cause and effect. Where it gets crazy is around this idea of actually reincarnating. Let's just look at some of the soul logic around this for a minute. This is a tradition for people who live in that area. They're not even considering outside people. In the context of reincarnation, what is your dharma? What's your social duty? And are you fulfilling it or not to hold up the universe? How does that even make sense outside of the context of the Hindu caste system? I don't know. And even still within the context of the Hindu caste system, who's making these kinds of value judgments of whether a person was good or not? And you know, a lot of these ideas about whether it would be reincarnating as another species or whatever, like a lot of these ideas do seem to be not only racist, but specious. Like the idea that humans are better than other animals and stuff. Again, a lot of these ideas are outdated. I hear you going, well, aren't humans better than other animals? Better to who? Better for what? Is it better to be a human? Well, that's someone's opinion. You would have to know what it's like to be like an eagle or a dolphin and a human before you would know what was the best thing to be. So I don't know. Those kinds of value judgments about whether it's good to be an otter or a worm, I don't know. But also a worm doesn't really have that much cognitive capacity. It's not going to be like learning lessons or anything. The other reason this soul math doesn't work is because, again, we have knowledge of the emergence of life on this planet. Many people have pointed out over the years that we've gone from having little to no life to more and more and more life. Exponential growth and development. So if these were all just the same souls recycling, you wouldn't see all this. It doesn't actually make sense within the cosmology and the explanatory power of the overarching view of what we know about science and everything. And speaking of that, a lot of people tell these stories, and what a lot of people consider evidence are these stories that people have heard about stories. And I'm not just dismissing them just because they're anecdotal. I don't have a problem with first-person reports. Even our best science is based on first-person reports. We just have peer review and double-blind tests and all these other kinds of ways to try to make it more sure. But ultimately, everything does come back to a first-person report. But the problem is that it doesn't fit into the big picture view that we have. It doesn't fit with all the rest of the data. It makes a lot of sense that they would get this soul math wrong, given what I was saying earlier about how all of these traditions were created at a time before we understood the micro and macro scales of reality. If they had any idea about the emergence of life over time, they wouldn't have thought this way. If they had any idea about how many billions of cells there were in a body, they wouldn't have thought this way. But now that we have all these maps, we can see that these ways of seeing things don't make any sense. The one thing I will say about Hindu culture is, in terms of their understanding about time, they probably actually got the closest. They have a very deep understanding of time and history that's probably the closest to anything scientific that any other religious tradition has ever come up with. So props to them for that. The reason why some of its ideas are so profound is because its imagery provokes these deep symbols that resonate with our ideas about deep time. And when you study it in terms of its historical context, when you understand where the ideas come from, you can understand that those people who made up those ideas didn't have good evidence or knowledge of what was going on to be able to make these claims in the first place. It was never a valid theory, and it doesn't fit with our current data. It's a religious idea, and in this case, it actually has been historically very harmful. These ideas stripped people of their uniqueness and crammed everyone into these boxes for thousands of years, and it's still going on today. This, my friends, is why we have to understand ideas in context. Try and see the big picture. These ideas are very outdated, and in the context of Buddhism, because Buddhism grows out of Hinduism, these creedal religions, or religions that a person would confess the creed of, grow out of the ethnic traditions. So Christianity grows out of Judaism, and Buddhism grows out of Hinduism. And in Zen and some of these higher understandings of Buddhism, the idea is that all is one. It's all the blanket, right? So the only transmigrant, or the only person that reincarnates, or the only thing that's shifting around is the absolute, or the word they would maybe use is God. There's traditional names for it as well. Atman. Anyways, basically the idea is, even within that tradition, self is a concept, is an illusion, is something to be transcended, and what we truly are is the blanket, even within this tradition. Especially at the higher stages of development of this tradition, that seems to be their position as well. Now, one way this idea of reincarnation could be valid or true is if we think about it like, I'm not the same person I used to be. Going back to what we were talking about at the beginning of this video, where I was saying that every 7 years I'm a completely new person. So maybe we could talk about our past stages of development as our past lives. Maybe we could talk about each one of our days as a life. We're still dealing with our actions of the past as showing up with this karmic residue in the right now, still having to deal with the consequences of what we did yesterday, today, and especially if you're awake and you're consciously creating your life, thinking of every new day as a new incarnation, a fresh start. That can be some beautiful poetry. Like, for example, I kind of make it a ritual. Every so often, I shave all my hair off and I take some time to think about how I've not lived up to my highest standards, how I want to do better, and how I can maybe do that. I meditate on those ideas while I'm shaving off my hair, and I forgive myself, and I let myself start over, and I say, okay, past is gone. Let's be here now, and let's do better.
Thanks so much for watching this video. If you enjoyed this, please check out the full-length video and like and subscribe.